Hello and welcome to our debate on operational efficiency in the public sector. My name is Gary Flood, I'm the editor of publictechnology.net. It is my pleasure this morning to introduce three panellists who will be debating, moving along some of the issues around efficiency, technology, cost control, cost savings, all these good, interesting issues in the public sector context. I'm now going to introduce the panel, starting with our colleague Steve Palmer.
Hi, I'm Steve Palmer. I'm Deputy Director at Hillingdon Council in London. I'm also the CIO, so I have a mix of operational frontline services such as highways and bereavement and imported food at Heathrow Airport. But I'm also responsible for our strategic use of technology within the authority, both for our own operations and also improving the choices and services which we provide to our residents.
In terms of Hillingdon, how many kind of people are you servicing there?
We service about 250,000, about 100,000 households, but the population more than doubles during the day, and we also have 95 million passenger journeys a year through Heathrow Airport, which is entirely within our borough as well.
Indeed, thank you very much. I'd next like to introduce Richard Sykes.
Richard Sykes, I'm an independent advisor nowadays. By background, I was Global Group CIO for a major international chemical company, ICI as was. More recently, I made my living acting as a strategic advisor to public sector and private sector companies and the vendor side. I worked for about a year and a half on the government G-Cloud project between 2009 and 2010. And I continue to review and critique developments in that area. I do a column every month for CIO magazine as well, and you can read about my views there.
Thank you very much. And Chris Blenkhorn.
Hi Gary, Chris Blenkhorn. I'm a solutions architect in Cisco's public sector operation. My role is to work on pan-government programs for Cisco. This has included the Treasury's Operation Efficiency Programme and our response to that, but also some of the specific programmes that come out of the government's ICT strategy. That includes the Public Services Network and the G-Cloud programme.
Thank you very much. So we have a mix today of a coalface, real-life public sector ICT leader, an operational expert. We have an independent consultant. We have a technology and a supplier viewpoint. I think those are the three important stakeholder positions to talk about operational efficiency. What I'm now going to ask to do is ask each of the gentlemen to open with a kind of positioning statement, if you like, of what does this term operational efficiency mean to each of them. Let's start with Chris.
We're told that the public sector is in an era of austerity, but the same does apply to private sector companies such as Cisco. In 2008 and 2009, there was probably one of the greatest economic downturns in recent time, and Cisco had to make a response to that. What we found as an organisation we had to do was to adopt both cultural and business process change. And we did that by focusing on three areas where we needed to drive operation efficiency and cost saving. The first was around the workforce. So how can you make the workforce much more efficient, much more productive? The second was around the use of buildings and the energy and resources to drive them efficiently and to ensure that they provided the facilities for a mobile, flexible workforce. And the third area was around ICT, around technology itself.
Okay.
Firstly, we had to develop a platform, an ICT platform, which would enable a number of business applications to support changes to the workforce and the way we used our workplace. But secondly, we need to drive cost out of ICT itself. So we need to make sure that our data centres were as efficient and effective and as agile as possible. We needed to avoid duplication. We needed to ensure that our desktop provision was as effective as possible. And it was by focusing on those three key areas within our business, workforce, workplace and ICT, that we were able to return very, very substantial cost savings to the business. In our financial year ending 2009, cost savings returned $1.9 billion to the bottom line for Cisco. So what we're seeking to do now through this debate and otherwise to share some of those experiences with our public sector customers.
So your answer to my question is very well put. Is you are talking as someone whose organisation has been through a process of trying to extract as much operational efficiency in a challenging time, and perhaps there's a thought there that you'd actually now like to share some of this experience. I'm happy with that. I must say, of course, that you're a gigantic global organisation which may not have the same organisations may not have the same resources as yours, but are you thinking there's some general principles that could be applied?
Well, I think the principles that we applied apply to any organisation. Focus on the areas where there is the biggest budget allocated. And for most organisations, that is focus on the workforce, the workplace, which includes energy and resources increasingly, and ICT. And in each of those areas, we believe that technology and the use of ICT can be a critical enabler, particularly around the workforce. There's a lot of discussion around new ways of working, but within Cisco we use a blend of unified communications, video and collaboration applications, so our staff can work from anywhere they wish, from home, from a hotel, from any office. That drives down the costs associated with travel and hotel expenses, but also significantly increases productive time. And also those tools allow a degree of interaction between individual members of staff that wouldn't be possible in normal circumstances. So there are actual additional pluses there as well.
So let's pause you there, sir, which is giving us you have some skin in the game because Cisco's been through some of this. You have some thoughts there about specific technologies which have helped you. You've got some general thoughts about workplace efficiency. That's all good stuff. Let's put a pause on you for a minute, Chris. Let's go to Steve, and I wonder what from someone with, especially with your kind of dual responsibility, for your position, what does the term operational efficiency mean in the Hillingdon context?
I think the first thing I'd say is that we've been in times of austerity in the public sector, and I think I'm in my 41st year, despite these youthful looks. A child genius, Steve. Well, absolutely. I started when I was 4. The thing for me has been we've always had challenges about more demands than we can service using the resources that we've got. So operational efficiency has always been something which has been to the fore of all of the services I've ever been involved with and the bodies I've worked with. I think the interesting thing for me, once I moved from operational work into technology and now have this this dual role, is the role that technology can play in making things more operationally efficient. So what's the definition of that? Well, for me, it's about the fact that the government and the local taxpayers entrust us with some pretty significant sums of money each year, you know, some hundreds of millions of pounds. And what we're looking to do is to give the best possible service that we can to residents for that money. It's quite an interesting set of complex dynamics, because some of it is services which people want and ask for. Some of them are services which people don't want and don't want to ask for, because we have a regulatory function as well. So to have some degree of local input into the definition of the service is always important, but all the standard stuff applies. You know, we want people to be efficient and effective and work smartly, but more than anything else, I think at the moment we're seeing that we want to drive the maximum value that we can from all of the existing investments that we've made, both in equipment and technology, as well as our people, to deliver services that are cost effective and efficient, but which also identify and manage risk, which are also important issues.
You mentioned in some ways, you know, plus ça change, but there are new things going on there. Has your drive to kind of make the most of your existing investment changed, or not particularly, since things like that tough November 2010 CSR?
Yeah, I think it has. It's really concentrated our minds on the possibilities around self-service in particular. We launched a resident card, which I think is probably the largest public sector scheme, other than the Oyster card that TfL run. And we did that through a self-service portal. And we were quite surprised by the number of people who had now almost sort of crossed the divide and said to us, actually, I'd prefer to be doing these things in my own time, at my convenience,
Okay.
electronically.
The channel shift, right?
The channel shift indeed, and we have now got upwards of 200 properly transformed end-to-end processes on our site for our citizens. We launched a portal comparatively recently with little or no publicity, and found that within 6 weeks we'd got in excess of 20,000 of our 100,000 households signed up
pretty
to
good,
it.
yeah.
So it's really concentrated us around those sorts of values, because there is a constant and growing demand on things like older people's services, adult social care, which we are going to struggle to meet financially going forward unless we absolutely drive the maximum return from the investment we make in technology.
We're going to kick around some of those ideas, I think,
Sure.
in a minute. I mean, a phrase I recall perhaps from the 90s, which may need to make a comeback: business process re-engineering. Okay, let's go back and have another think about some of that kind of stuff. So
Yep.
perhaps that's a journey you've already started.
It is absolutely everything that we've put onto our site recently. We've gone right the way back to basics and re-engineered the process. We are not putting anything up where we haven't revisited the way that we deal with it.
Okay.
We've developed our contact centre on exactly the same basis. And we have a programme within Hillingdon called Business Improvement Delivery, which is aimed at going through the entire council over a 2-year period. We're about halfway through it at the moment, and challenging not just the processes, but how we deliver the outcomes of those. For instance, in applications, we receive applications for a multitude of licences or approvals. We've put that into a common applications processing team rather than have lots of different teams dealing with one specialism. We've found that we can train people very easily to be able to deal with 15, 20, 30 types of licence and application.
So I'll stop you there, sir, just to get some other perspective. So I've heard there about looking to change fundamental business processes, looking to maximise your investment in ICT. We have got new digital things going on there, but we can come back and explore those issues in a couple of seconds. Thank you. I'd like to turn now to Richard Sykes. Richard, you've got an interesting perspective on some of this, having got extensive private sector experience, an independent analysis going on of central government and other public sector activities. Again, to you, sir, what does this term operational efficiency mean to you?
First and foremost, it is about people and their processes.
Okay.
And it's about their motivation as well, because it's about the ability to have the public sector workforce, people who are working in the public sector, given the maximum opportunity to work highly effectively, highly efficiently,
Okay.
and in a highly motivated fashion. Now, what I see happening at the moment is that the shifts in the capability of the technology are opening up a lot of new opportunities to address the fundamentals there.
Okay.
If you're going to talk about operational efficiency, one of the factors you also need to talk about is effectiveness. There's a lovely quote which I use a lot from a management consultant, now alas no longer with us, Peter Drucker, who said, there's nothing more stupid than making more efficient that you shouldn't do in the first place.
Right.
So the first thing that's happening now is that there's a lot of new capability that allows you, business process re-engineering, to go back to the fundamentals and say, how do we do this the right way, the most effective way? And then, having done that, work out the most efficient operational ways of doing it. There's a lot that you can now totally automate and therefore get off people's shoulders so that they're then free to focus your time on the most important things. And I would absolutely, as a citizen of the Republic of Islington, comparing notes with Steve over a coffee earlier on, I do some work with our local police in the area of the youth challenge that we have in our ward in Islington. We would love to get more money into that area. The way that we're going to be able to get more money in that area is to see central government and local government be able to change the efficiency and effectiveness of their operations using the new capabilities so that the money can be slowly moved to where it is absolutely needed, more frontline, more people and effective. But the key thing is that operational efficiency is about people and process and new ways of motivating people and process to maximum effectiveness.
I think that's an interesting thought. I'm struck there perhaps by the thought, automate. Doesn't that just mean getting rid of these people you want to being more effective?
I don't think it means getting rid of people. What it means is that you move and you automate a lot of the routine dross that heretofore has not been very motivating, and you can get it done and out of the way so that people can actually be then focused more on the frontline stuff where the human contribution is really required. I make a little analogy in some of the presentations I do about you can have 2 Weetabix for your breakfast, highly automated production, 20p, absolutely superb, fit for purpose. That then allows you to have people freed to go to the more expensive restaurants, eateries and things like that are more people intensive, which will cost you a lot more than 20p for your breakfast, but you will then get the people doing the things that people are really needed for.
Interesting stuff. Let's have a review there. Has anyone of you guys got a comment on anyone else's perspective here? Because they're not all the same. I think we definitely heard about workplace, workforce, technology from Chris. I heard about working on investment, existing investment, not necessarily go out and buying new kits or anything, far from it, right? But also looking at working about changing business processes. Richard there's got some interesting thoughts about the right kind of mix of what people should be doing. So operational efficiency is about what? Is it about somehow putting together in the right combination people and technology and process?
Let me take a lead on that, building on what Chris was saying. I think increasingly what we're getting is that a lot of the underlying infrastructural capability you need, telecommunications, things like that, basic office capabilities and things like that, are increasingly now available in a highly automated structure, very low cost, and they're available in services that are equally open to be used by the public sector or by the private sector or as consumer services.
Okay.
And therefore what you're getting is, if you like, that underlying infrastructural and some of the back office stuff available in a form that can become very much more cheaper, very responsive. Then my point is that if you can move your local government units to use those services, it then liberates you to move the people to the more frontline jobs where the human contribution is really valued, because they're no longer having to work away on the dross and the drudgery, if you like, of that back office stuff. But importantly, it's stuff that both the private sector and the consumer marketplaces use, so you can see big service factories emerging, highly automated server farms that are serving all of those sectors with the right degree of security and things that the public sector requires, and the right degree of privacy protection the private sector requires, but getting a very good cost base as a result, because they're serving all those markets at the same time.
Steve, as someone on the front line, was going to immediately turn to you, so by automating the back end, you'll be fine, right?
No, I'd pick up a couple of things that Richard said. I mean, the first one was that it doesn't necessarily mean a reduction in people. We haven't got the money to sustain the workforce in the public sector that we've had in the past. So what we have to do is to take those technological innovations and new products that are appearing, where there is a clear business case for investment in them. And these days, that has to be a hard cash return. It has to be cashable benefits to justify making that investment. If we do that, then we can make people more productive, and the reduced size workforce is going to need to deliver much more per head. And some people would say, OK, that's exactly what we should have been doing for some years, and I think there's probably an element of truth in that. I think the one thing we haven't touched on at all really today, actually, which I think is a major driver for this, actually is about information, because technology does what technology does, doesn't it? You know, it stores, it stores it, and you can get it back afterwards. But actually, to me, this part of this agenda is about how we join up the public sector, organisations such as the NHS, some of the voluntary sector organisations, so that we can properly deal with data in ways that generate real intelligence about the need for the allocation of our resources.
Is this a kind of open data idea?
Well, it's a sort of open data idea, because I think we traditionally always look at the public sector as being the custodians of that data and therefore the users of it. But actually, I think communities, and opening that data to the communities, would also have some pretty positive benefits here as well.
Okay.
And I think that their input into ways that those resources are delivered locally, and Richard's issue about his local ward in Islington and where they can best deploy some of the resources available to them, absolutely has to be the way forward. We've got a project at the moment on family intervention where we understand that actually if we can get in there at the early stages of problem, that over the course of the lifespan of a family unit, if there is such a thing,
Right.
we can probably save some hundreds of thousands of pounds of unnecessary interventions later on.
And do some good, I hope.
Indeed, and by making those interventions early within the system, and that challenges the whole way that you think about this whole operational efficiency agenda as well, because it stops things being quite so siloed.
That's interesting.
But you need that information available to all of the organisations who deliver that. That would be the police, the local authority, the NHS, the voluntary sector, other bodies, to be able to work on a common platform and common solutions that are joined up and actually deliver.
I'm going to throw that keyword information to Chris. I don't know if he'll particularly take it, or another part of what we're talking there about terms of back end, in terms of network. What have you been picking up in terms of the conversation so far that's relevant?
Well, I would pick up on joined up service and sharing information. That's critical to efficiency. It's easy to look at one part of the public sector and make that efficient, but as we all understand, in many cases it's making the different parts of the public sector work together effectively to achieve operational efficiency and deliver cost savings. And from a technologist point of view, I think two of the most interesting developments for me have been the Public Services Network and the G-Cloud programs, which are all about how the public sector can consume ICT differently in order to be able to share what is essentially a private cloud for the public sector. That will allow for the first time all organisations to communicate one to another, to share information. And I think over a period of years that's going to have a huge impact on how organisations share resources, share the delivery of services, share information, and I think that will be to the good of those organisations from an efficiency and cost-saving point of view, but also ultimately to us as the people who will take those public services.
Well, I'm going to slightly rain on all of your parades, and I'm going to throw some roadblocks in all this kind of these great ideas here, because if it was this great and simple, then we'd all be living in Shangri-La, and last time I looked, we're not quite there. We do have some issues about resistance to shared services, perhaps, in some parts of the local government. We have a lot of talk about cloud, perhaps not enormous amounts of actual work on the ground yet. There are inevitably people who say, I simply can't do this with the budget I've been allocated. There's going to be pain, there's going to be crisis. Gentlemen, can operational efficiency be moved to in the current context? Perhaps Richard could start us off here.
What you've got at the moment is absolutely fascinating, because the shift in capabilities as a result of virtualization, automation, things like that, are actually hitting in three different areas simultaneously. It's changing how we run the technology and deliver the capabilities of the technology, highly automated service factories and big server farms. It's altering the competitive landscape of the vendors, because vendors who've had large chunks of their business in what I call bums on seats business models, very people intensive, are suddenly finding they're getting competition from suppliers who are highly automated.
Okay.
Think of desktop, virtualized desktop and things like that. And then you've got the government and private sector, but government is a very good example of this, local and national, that has a lot of legacy systems and a lot of people tied up with the looking and the management of those legacy systems. And in order to begin getting the real benefits that the new capabilities are offering us, you've got to begin to shift away those legacy systems and re-engineer and work them. So you've got a triple transformation. When you get three major areas like that transforming simultaneously, it is a very good recipe for confusion.
Okay.
Not helped, might I say, by the marketing folk, who tend to take a very simple concept like the cloud and, everything that moves is the cloud, and that isn't helpful. you've got to get clarity, and part of my work as a strategic advisor help people see the clarity through this triple transformation.
Okay.
The driving forces, because of the improvement in cost efficiency, effective use of resources, the liberation of people to really do what people need to do is tremendous. And I'll give you just a very little example, going back to what Steve and I are talking about in Islington. In Islington, in each of the wards, we have a full-time policeman in each of the secondary schools. They still have to go and get on the Met computer service. They have to leave the school and go to the local Metropolitan Police Centre, even though the school has very good computing services.
Okay.
So, small shift. If you could get that shift to the kind of broader general platform that Chris was talking about, that would increase the efficiency and effectiveness of that policeman and his motivation or her motivation, because they can actually stay more full-time in the school. So it's a whole myriad of the small changes that are possible, transformations, against a background that because you're changing how the technology is delivered, how it affects the competitive landscape of the suppliers, how it affects the speed you get out of the use of legacy systems to new systems, is a complex change program to manage through.
Confusion, complexity.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, Chris?
And I think we're starting to see that in some of the regions around the country. There are regional PSN programs that some of which have been realised, at least in the initial stages. And for the first time, we're seeing some of those stakeholder groups, local authorities, police, fire and rescue and healthcare, genuinely starting to sit down in the same room and plan how, first of all, they can share infrastructure, where there are areas where they can share services. And over a period, I think there's a likelihood for business convergence between those organisations, to share tools, to share information, to share processes.
Yeah.
And it may be over a period of years that there's actually a blurring of some of those boundaries, so that in the short term, those police officers in those schools will be able to use that shared infrastructure in just that way, Richard.
Is that before we go to Steve, I mean, your organisation has successfully transformed itself in a time of a difficult operating environment. And I don't think anyone would be so naive as to think that was done pain-free. How do you deal with, you know, these stresses, people issues, cultural change, challenges? I mean, I assume it's not a weekend's job.
No. There has to be a clear programme. There has to be clear leadership from the top. There has to be a clear policy that there has to be change, both cultural in the sense of the expectations of staff and in terms of how business processes can be changed to be made more efficient. Cisco is a technology company, so we espouse the use of technology, and I think that's very much Steve's message from Hillingdon. So it's not pain-free, but nonetheless technology can make huge changes. And if individuals are able to adapt to that change, then businesses can be made more efficient. But of course, in Cisco, we find that there are huge benefits to the individual. You know, we find significant improvements in work-life balance and other benefits that flow from that. So it's not a question of a member of staff giving everything. There are lots of rewards from changing the way we work.
Any of this makes sense to you from where you're sitting, Steve, in terms of the kind of changes and challenges around the move to operational efficiency?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I think that CSR actually was the real marker in the ground for us.
Okay.
Not for my ego, but I think just to put in context, 2009-10, I was the president of Soccer the Society for IT Management. And the things that we were talking about in my year suddenly became absolutely essential from CSR onwards. The pace of change has accelerated since then because it has to. The significant reductions in spending capability, which we now have, have really focused this agenda. We in Hillingdon are moving to cloud-based desktops.
Okay.
I think we've accelerated
because it's trendy.
No, because we can't afford to run the old model. I estimate an annual return of about £600,000 in hard cash to the front line.
Excellent.
To support our operations in those things like family intervention and older people's services.
Great.
Because I think what's also happened is we've been able to put pressure back onto the suppliers and say to them, actually, if you accelerate, we now have enough momentum to be able to deal to deal with this. And I think the market's moved on incredibly in the cloud area in the last 12 months alone, and some real opportunities have opened up, which I wouldn't have thought possible less than 2 years ago.
Okay. What would you say to a supplier, not necessarily Chris, though he's on our panel, what should the supplier community be saying to people on the front line like you guys? What do you want to hear from them that could help you?
I think it goes into a number of different areas. The first is a clear understanding that investment in the future is going to be much more challenging in terms of returning hard cash savings and increasing our operational efficiency.
Okay.
The second one is that I think that the old licensing models are broken, and you won't continue to generate revenues in the way that you have in the past. That software as a service is going to gather momentum, and that there's some very agile, comparatively new entrants to parts of this market who are going to destroy your comfortable existence. But what I'd also like the suppliers to do, and this isn't a plug for Cisco, but they've always done it, and I think it's a model for other organisations, is that what they share with us is that journey that they've been through on their transformation. And we've been able to do some peer work, in HR, sometimes with finance, sometimes with property, taking Cisco's approach and remodelling it to a certain extent to meet the public sector requirements that we have. But equally, I think we've been able to help inform them around the way that we will need to operate in the future. So I think partnership, is such a difficult and hackneyed word at times, but that spirit of collaboration has to go not just across the public sector, as I said, the police and the NHS voluntary sector. We have to work in very close proximity to our suppliers to develop those products and solutions that we want going forward, and that's a challenge for us because we have to be much more grown up about those relationships with the external suppliers, and we also have to be very clear about what our end game is with the product that we're trying to deploy. If we try and pretend that that's something that's secret to us, we will not get the benefits that we need from the investments that we make.
I think it's worth spending a minute or so longer on the supplier issue, because I think they're a very important part of the picture. And I've heard commentary like as suppliers become more squeezed, they're tending to put more effort into those kind of, slick sales efforts, perhaps, than kind of really trying to understand the customer. You're saying you haven't had that experience with Cisco, and I'm very pleased you have. Do you see any element of that? I bet you get a lot of cold calls per day, Steve. Yes,
I have a wonderful colleague who feels
all that
those
for you.
For me. Otherwise, I would never do any work at all.
Sure,
I could spend all day. And I'm well aware that everyone in the supplier community has got the next best thing, or the one thing that would make my life so different. It would be unbelievable. But unfortunately, what we have to do is to set our priorities. And the vast majority of things at the moment, what we're looking to do is we've made investment decisions sometimes in the past and not driven full value out of those, so we're maximising that. But the scope for innovation is really around the ways that we work and self-service, in my view, going forward.
A comment from Chris before we move to Richard on that. Chris, are you hearing this kind of, you having this kind of dialogue with your customers in the public sector in the UK? Does this sound relevant to you?
Well, I think the starter was, what do these changes in the market mean to suppliers?
Indeed.
And I think within Cisco we're absolutely clear the government has a policy that it wants to consume ICT in a very different way. It wants to consume it as a service, whether that be infrastructure, networks, security, data centre, or applications, whether they be applications such as voice, which are quite simple in nature, right up to some very, very complicated application areas they want to consume as a service.
Indeed.
This means for Cisco a fundamental change in terms of how we go to market. So the programs that mark that out, such as the Public Services Network program and G-Cloud, have been given absolutely top priority within Cisco, because we have to be sure that we take the right steps from a business perspective to mark that change and make sure when that change happens that we continue to service our customers, such as Steve, albeit maybe through a completely different channel.
And the message that you're bringing to these guys is about the power of technology to try and help meet some of the challenges in this context. And it's, I assume it's been, that concentration has been focused by your own experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, our mantra is the beneficial use of technology to drive efficiency and cost saving. You know, that's what it's all about. But in parallel with that, to drive further cost saving, there is the desire of the public sector to consume ICT in a very different way. And that has a major impact on our business and how we service our customers. And for that reason, to make sure that we can service that transition in the marketplace, we're giving those programmes the very top priority within our business.
Could I have a quick comment on the supply market, if you have one, Richard, before we move to...
I do, and I'm picking up on both Steve and Chris's points.
Yeah.
I think the first thing is key observation is that we're now talking about a services model. One consequence of that services model is that if you have a determined clarity of the kind of change program you want to bring through, it's increasingly possible to do the changes you want within the framework almost of a single year's cash flows. You're no longer having to talk about big programs where you've got to sign up for a 5-year or a 10-year deal.
Okay.
Because what you're getting is a segregation of the issue of the capital investment decisions sit on the vendor side to make decisions to be capital investments. You're basically buying a service. If the service, taking Steve's point of his desktop out of the cloud, is so much cheaper, then the benefits he's going to get within the year will more than pay his costs of transformation. So it becomes an easier budget if you're determined to handle the change. I think the second thing is that the vendor landscape, I said earlier on, is a shifting and changing one. And the plea that I make, I work a certain amount with the Trade Association Intellect, and I sat on their board for a while. They are the trade association for the IT, telecoms, electronics industry, is for a greater honesty and clarity within the broader vendor community of the degree that the business models are shifting and changing. Pretty well without exception, all the significant players, either the new challengers who are coming in or the older established players, have very strong balance sheets. They've got the room for manoeuvre to do the investment in change. My argument is that even if you're faced as a government department or a local government with a long-established contract, the message has got to be to go back to that supplier and say, you as a supplier know you've got to change now, the environment is changing, so let's actually sit down. You claim you've got a 5-year contract we want to hold you to, but let's sit down and resort this out, because you want to change as well as us changing, and maybe this is the opportunity for us to do change together. In other words, the vendor community itself is increasingly differentiated between newer challengers who are helping break the mold, the older established players, and the recent parliamentary PSC report talked about a concern about an oligopoly of some dominant suppliers. That dominant supplier group knows that it's got to change its business models, and fast. And government departments, local government units would say, right, let's work with you and help you do that change fast, to our benefit, to your benefit, to mutual benefit. I think that's a good way forward.
Hurrah for that. I'm going to try and put together some closing thoughts here for our audience. I'm going to ask you, gentlemen, if possible, in a sentence. I know that's very hard. We've had some great keywords, some great thoughts here. I mean, dialogue, partnership, workplace, efficiency, technology, all very relevant. Very briefly, for people watching this resource, Steve, who want to kind of start the journey, what's your advice in a sentence or two, and then we'll move to Richard.
I think the advice is be brave, but make sure you take, in my context, your residents, your politicians and your colleagues with you.
Good. So it's a shared journey.
It's a shared journey.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Richard, a sentence?
Tremendous opportunity to change for the good, but have great clarity of that change programme, all the various stakeholders well involved, and then you'll be surprised the degree to which that change is now possible and doesn't require great big complex multi-year programmes. It can be done year by year within the context of existing budgets.
So again, a thought about dialogue, partnership, working with a team. Okay. And finally, Chris?
And finally, just to broaden it out, going back several years, there was a great interest in the green agenda. But as everyone focused on efficiency and cost saving, that dropped off.
Okay.
Certainly within Cisco, we're seeing a renewed interest in green. There's a new greening government ICT strategy, which is much broader based.
Yeah.
And our message would be that cost equals carbon and carbon equals cost. So if you address
Yes.
efficiency and cost saving, you also address green obligations which most organisations have through the CRC efficiency scheme.
That's a good point. Yeah. Well, I'd like to thank everyone today for kicking around some very, very important issues, and I'd like to thank you for sharing your expertise. I think if I have a final thought for our audience, it is I absolutely heard technology today, I heard partnership, I heard dialogue, and I think you cannot pretend it's simply about technology. It's got to be about people and organisations as well. So I think that's some great oversight on this issue, gentlemen. I'd like to wish our audience good luck on the journey to operational efficiency. Thank you for your time, everyone.